that stood as a symbol of wealth and grandeur. The estate, surrounded by lush gardens and towering gates, belonged to Aldrich, a man who had achieved more than most could ever dream of in a single lifetime. At just 30 years old, he was already a millionaire, a tycoon known for his swift rise to success in the world of business. His empire spanned industries from tech to real estate, and his name was synonymous with power, luxury, and influence. Yet, despite his wealth, Aldrich found himself in the midst of an invisible void. He could purchase anything his heart desired: expensive cars, rare antiques, extravagant vacations, and even the finest wine, but none of these things could fill the emptiness that had begun to settle within him. His mansion was always full of guests, laughter, and music, but behind the masks of his extravagant parties, there was always a quiet loneliness that followed him like a shadow. Aldrich had everything, except the one thing that money could not buy: true love. It was a crisp evening in late autumn when Aldrich hosted one of his infamous soirees. The grand hall of his mansion gleamed with opulence, crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings, the walls adorned with exquisite works of art, and tables laden with the finest delicacies. The who's who of high society gathered to celebrate, with laughter and chatter echoing off the walls. Yet, amidst the clinking of champagne glasses and the vibrant atmosphere, Aldrich felt his usual sense of detachment. His friends, though entertaining and influential, were not the ones he longed for. His life, despite its outward beauty, felt hollow. Among the guests was Victor, a man whose reputation for gambling and making outrageous wagers was legendary. Known for his sharp wit and devil-may-care attitude, Victor had never met a challenge he wouldn't embrace, especially if there was money or pride to be gained. He was a friend of sorts to Aldrich, though their connection was more based on mutual admiration than anything deeper. As the night wore on, Victor, ever the provocateur, leaned across the table where Aldrich sat, a glass of fine red wine in hand, swirling the liquid absent-mindedly. "I'll make you a bet," Victor said, his voice low but teasing, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Aldrich raised an eyebrow, sensing the challenge before it was fully spoken. "What kind of bet are you talking about?" Victor leaned closer, his grin widening. "I bet you that you couldn't find a woman who would marry you for love. No tricks, no manipulations. I'm talking about love, Aldrich. A woman who genuinely loves you for who you are, not for your wealth or your status." Aldrich chuckled softly, brushing off the challenge as if it were a mere joke. He had seen enough women fawn over him, basking in his wealth and the allure of his lavish lifestyle. Love, he assumed, was often a facade, a temporary attraction that dissolved as soon as the bank accounts were revealed. "Is that so?" Aldrich asked, leaning back in his chair. "You think no woman could love me for who I am, beyond the money?" Victor's grin only deepened, his eyes sparkling with a mix of challenge and intrigue. "Exactly. I don't believe it's possible. And if you do prove me wrong, I'll give you a large sum of money, more than you could ever imagine. But here's the catch: you must marry a woman of my choosing." Aldrich's curiosity piqued, and he smirked. "Your choice? You've got to be kidding me. I'd never let someone else dictate my choice of a partner." Victor shrugged casually, not bothered by the challenge. "Oh, I'm not worried. You'll win the bet easily. But I'll make it interesting. The woman I choose will be someone, far from what you expect. Someone who, in your world, would seem impossible to fall in love with." Aldrich's laughter was genuine, but it carried a hint of amusement. "A challenge then? You really think you can outsmart me?" Victor's eyes twinkled. "Let's find out. I'll even make it more interesting. If you can marry her and she loves you, without any tricks, you'll win. But if she doesn't love you for you, I'll take your money, and you'll have to admit that love is just a myth, a fleeting thing that no one can control." The terms were set, and the wager was sealed with a handshake. For Aldrich, this was no more than a game, a way to prove that, even in matters of love, he could win. He was confident that no woman would see past his wealth to see the man behind the fortune. After all, he had everything a woman could want, except, perhaps, the one thing that seemed most important, his heart. As the night went on, the sound of laughter and music filled the hall, but Aldrich couldn't shake the lingering thought of Victor's challenge. What kind of woman would Victor choose? And, more importantly, would she ever fall for him? He dismissed the worry as quickly as it came, telling himself that, whatever the outcome, he would win. But what Aldrich didn't know was that Victor had already made his choice, and it was a choice that would change Aldrich's life forever. Little did he know, this bet would lead him down a path where love was no longer something to be bought or manipulated. It would become something far more complicated, and far more real than Aldrich ever imagined. The following morning, Aldrich found himself at the mercy of Victor's strange wager. The air was crisp and clear, with the golden light of dawn filtering through the trees as the two men made their way toward the village square. Aldrich, still incredulous about the bet and its terms, felt a flutter of excitement stir in his chest. He had made countless deals, outwitted rivals, and charmed women in every corner of the globe. How hard could it be to win the heart of a woman, especially when the odds were so tilted in his favor? As they entered the square, Aldrich's gaze swept over the gathering crowd. Villagers milled about, going about their daily routines. The square was lined with quaint stone buildings, their rustic facades softened by ivy and flowers that climbed their walls. Children played in the dirt, while older folk sat on benches, gossiping and watching the world go by. But in the center of it all, standing like a statue carved from the earth itself, was Beatrix. Aldrich blinked, momentarily taken aback. She was unlike any woman he had ever encountered. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, unable to hide his surprise. Beatrix was large, taller and broader than most women, with a presence that filled the square. Her face was round and flushed with color, her cheeks rosy like apples under the sun. Her hair, a mass of wild auburn curls, framed her face in a way that felt untamed, as if nature itself had created her in defiance of convention. She laughed loudly, a sound that rang through the air like music, full of warmth and joy. Her laugh echoed off the cobblestones, drawing the attention of every person nearby. She was speaking to a group of children, who hung on her every word, their faces bright with affection. Beatrix exuded a confidence that was undeniable, but it was not the delicate, graceful charm that Aldrich was used to. Instead, it was a raw, authentic energy, full of life and vitality. She was real, unpolished, and unapologetic in her own skin. Aldrich's surprise gave way to discomfort. This was the woman Victor had chosen. There was nothing about Beatrix that fit the mold of the women Aldrich typically found himself drawn to, slender, poised, and accustomed to the luxury of his world. In fact, the thought of someone like Beatrix in his world, in his life, felt foreign. Victor, sensing his hesitation, slapped him on the back with a grin. "She's perfect, isn't she? I told you, Aldrich, she's exactly what you need. She's kind, generous, and intelligent. More than that, she's never been courted by anyone who could truly see her for who she is. She's always been overlooked because of her size, but I know you can win her heart." Aldrich shifted uncomfortably. He had never seen her before, but it was clear that the villagers were fond of her. A few older women nodded in approval as Beatrix passed by, giving her warm smiles. The children followed her like a trail of ducks behind their mother, eager for her attention and playful banter. Her confidence in herself was evident, yet Aldrich noticed the slight sadness that lingered in her eyes, something that seemed to contradict her outward joy. Victor's voice broke through Aldrich's thoughts. "It's simple, really. If you can make her fall in love with you, without your wealth, without your charm, just you as a man, you'll win. But if you fail, I get the money. And you'll have to admit that love isn't some game you can win with your riches." Aldrich gritted his teeth, momentarily irritated by the challenge. His mind spun with possibilities, calculating the best approach, the most effective strategy. He could charm her, flatter her, and, surely, with his wealth and influence, he could win her over in time. After all, no woman could resist a man like him. But there was something about Beatrix, something in the way she carried herself, that unsettled him. She didn't appear to need anything from him. Her confidence, her laughter, her unabashed self-love, these were things Aldrich had never had to work for. And yet, despite his initial doubt, something stirred in him, a reluctant admiration for the way she seemed to stand firm in her own skin. Victor's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I'm giving you the opportunity to prove me wrong, Aldrich. Win her heart. Show me that a man like you can truly love a woman without the crutch of wealth. But remember, there are no shortcuts. She's not interested in anything you can buy her." Aldrich nodded, a tight smile pulling at his lips. "I'll win, Victor. Don't worry." But as Beatrix caught sight of him, a brief flicker of recognition passed across her face. She smiled brightly and waved. It was a warm, genuine greeting, as if they were old friends, though Aldrich knew they had never met. "Hello there. You must be Aldrich, the famous millionaire. What brings you to our humble square?" Beatrix called out, her voice like the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. Aldrich blinked in surprise. Was she addressing him so casually? His usual charm, his suave demeanor, felt like an ill-fitting coat in the face of her straightforwardness. There was no pretense, no formality, just an openness that disarmed him in an instant. "Well, I suppose I was just admiring the village," Aldrich replied, his voice sounding unfamiliar to his own ears. "It's beautiful here." Beatrix beamed, her smile widening even further, and she stepped closer to him. "It is, isn't it? It's full of character, just like the people who live here. You must visit often." I don't," Aldrich admitted, taken aback by her directness. "I've never been here before, actually." "Then you've been missing out," she said with a wink, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "But now that you're here, I'll show you the sights. The best pies in the village, the old oak tree where the children play, and the best place for a cup of tea. It's the least I can do for such a distinguished guest." Aldrich stood frozen for a moment, trying to process her sudden, confident approach. The woman before him was nothing like the delicate, demure creatures of high society he was used to, and yet, there was something undeniably magnetic about her. She didn't seem to be impressed by his status, nor did she seem interested in him for any reason other than his being another soul in her village. It was a simplicity that left him both baffled and intrigued. Victor watched the exchange with a smirk. "There you go, Aldrich. There's your challenge. Now, go on. Win her heart, if you can." Aldrich was silent for a moment, his mind reeling with thoughts he hadn't expected to have. He was used to chasing after what he wanted, but this woman, she was different. The days following Aldrich's fateful introduction to Beatrix were a whirlwind of effort on his part. As per Victor's challenge, he threw himself into courting her with all the wealth and charm he possessed. Each morning, he would arrive at her modest home, armed with extravagant gifts, gold necklaces, rare perfumes, silk dresses, and present them to her with a practiced smile, certain that one of them would win her favor. But to his surprise, Beatrix never reacted the way he expected. The fine jewelry seemed to mean nothing to her. The dresses, though beautiful, were set aside in favor of worn-out skirts she preferred for working in the garden. And when they dined at the finest restaurants in the city, she would smile politely but never linger on the luxury of the surroundings. Instead, she would ask the waiter for simple fare, something fresh and wholesome, far from the extravagant dishes Aldrich was accustomed to ordering. After each dinner, Aldrich would eagerly await her reactions, expecting her to be dazzled by the opulence. But Beatrix never seemed impressed. If anything, she was more interested in discussing her day, her work with the village's children, or the upcoming harvest festival. She was unapologetically grounded, focused on what mattered to her, the well-being of the people around her, the simplicity of the world, and the causes she held dear. It was humbling. One evening, as they walked together through the village square, Aldrich made another attempt. He had arranged for a horse-drawn carriage to take them to a vineyard on the outskirts of town. He thought the idea of a private picnic among rows of grapevines, with bottles of the finest wine, might finally stir something in her. "You know, I'm not sure I've ever been on a picnic quite like this," Beatrix said, glancing at the vast fields surrounding them. The sunlight filtered through the branches of an old oak tree nearby, casting long shadows as they sat together on the blanket. "I thought you might like it," Aldrich replied, pulling a bottle of wine from the basket. "It's the best, you know. Only the finest for you." She looked at the bottle, but there was no sparkle in her eyes. Instead, she smiled warmly, as though grateful for his effort but not particularly impressed. "I'm sure it is," she said softly, pouring herself a modest glass. "But you know, the best things in life are often the simplest. You could spend your whole life searching for something grand, but when you stop and notice the little things, you'll see the beauty in them." Aldrich felt a pang of confusion. "I'm not sure I understand. I've been trying to show you everything I can offer. Isn't that what love is? To give someone the best?" Beatrix took a sip of her wine, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "Love isn't about the best, Aldrich. It's about being present. It's about caring, about sharing your life with someone, not just your things. People often forget that, especially when they have as much as you do." Aldrich was stunned by her words. He had never met anyone so unaffected by his wealth. Women, in his experience, were captivated by it, by the jewels, the grandeur, the invitations to dine at the finest establishments. He had never encountered a woman who didn't at least appreciate the attention and luxury that came with him. But Beatrix was different. As the days turned into weeks, Aldrich found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about relationships. His attempts to win her over with extravagant gestures felt hollow in comparison to the simple ways she lived her life. Beatrix didn't care about his money or the fine clothes he wore. What mattered to her was the heart, the person behind the wealth. And that, Aldrich realized, was something he had never truly offered anyone. One afternoon, after a long walk through the village, they sat side by side on a wooden bench by the riverbank. The soft murmur of the water flowing nearby was the only sound, and for a long moment, they simply enjoyed the quiet. "You know," Aldrich said, breaking the silence, "I've never met anyone like you. I've been around the world, had everything I could ever want. But you don't care about any of that." Beatrix chuckled softly, her head tilted as she looked at him. "I'm sure that's because you've never really met anyone at all, Aldrich. You've been looking for love in all the wrong places." Aldrich's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand. I'm giving you everything I have. Isn't that how love works?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of kindness and wisdom. "Love isn't about giving what you have, Aldrich. It's about giving what you are. It's about showing up for someone, being real, and sharing your soul, not your possessions. I want to know you, not your money. I want to know the real you, the one who feels the pain of the village, who dreams of making the world better, who values honesty and kindness. That's what matters." Aldrich was silent for a long time, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, he was faced with the truth that he had never truly given of himself. His wealth, his accomplishments, they had always been tools to cover up the fact that he was terrified of being vulnerable, of showing the parts of himself that weren't polished or perfect. Beatrix, in her gentle way, had begun to strip away those walls. She saw past the facade of the millionaire and spoke to the man who had long been hidden beneath it. Aldrich looked at her, the weight of her words settling into his chest. He had thought he could buy love, that it could be won with riches and grand gestures. But Beatrix was showing him that love, true love, was far more elusive. It was not about impressing someone, it was about connecting with them on a deeper level, beyond material things. For the first time, Aldrich felt a stirring within him, a real, genuine desire to be seen, not for his wealth, but for who he truly was. And for the first time, he realized that perhaps, in this strange, unexpected challenge, he wasn't just trying to win her heart. He was learning to open his own. As the days turned into weeks, Aldrich found himself losing track of time. His world, once defined by opulence, power, and status, began to shift in ways he never anticipated. No longer was he focused on the bet or proving his worth to Victor. The chase for Beatrix's love had transformed into something deeper, something real. He started to spend more time in the village, engaging in projects that didn't involve wealth or influence. Together, he and Beatrix worked on community events, helping to restore the local schoolhouse, organizing charity drives for families in need, and planting trees to beautify the village square. Aldrich found joy in the simplicity of these tasks, in working side by side with Beatrix, and in learning about the people she cared so much about. Through it all, Aldrich was astounded by the way Beatrix saw the world. She saw beauty in things others overlooked, and her heart was as open as the vast sky above them. She never sought praise for her efforts and was constantly focused on how she could give, not just take. She taught him to value the small moments, like the way the sun dipped behind the hills at dusk or how the sound of children's laughter carried on the wind. Their connection deepened, and Aldrich began to notice the way his heart swelled when Beatrix smiled at him, how her touch lingered in his mind long after they parted ways. He realized he was no longer trying to impress her, he was simply enjoying being in her presence, learning from her, and loving her in a way that felt authentic. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, Aldrich and Beatrix sat side by side on a bench near the river. The air was cool, and the world around them seemed to pause in the quiet beauty of the moment. He glanced over at Beatrix, who was watching the river as it gently flowed past, her eyes soft and thoughtful. Something inside him shifted, and for the first time, Aldrich felt a deep sense of certainty. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't about winning a bet. This was about love, the kind of love that was pure and untainted, the kind that didn't need anything other than two people coming together in a shared understanding. Taking a deep breath, Aldrich reached for Beatrix's hand, his fingers trembling slightly. She turned to him, her gaze warm and steady. "Beatrix," he began, his voice low but full of emotion. "I've come to realize something. I don't care about the bet anymore. I don't care about proving anything to anyone. What I care about is you. I want to marry you, not because of some challenge or wager, but because I love you." The words felt like they had been waiting inside him for a long time, and now that they were spoken, they settled in his chest with a sense of finality. The weight he had been carrying, the need to win, to prove his worth, had melted away, leaving only the truth of his feelings. Beatrix's eyes softened as she gazed at him, and a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She didn't speak immediately, but the way she looked at him, as though seeing into his soul, made Aldrich's heart race with anticipation. "You don't need to prove anything to me, Aldrich," Beatrix said quietly, her voice carrying a depth of understanding. "I've always known that you have a good heart. But what I've been waiting for, what I've been hoping for, is for you to see it too." Her words took him by surprise. She had known all along, even before he realized it himself. She had seen through the walls he had built around himself, the facade of wealth and status, and had understood the essence of who he was. Aldrich's chest tightened, and for a moment, he could only gaze at her in awe. Beatrix had never been interested in his wealth or his reputation. She had been waiting for him to see past the surface and understand what truly mattered, the kindness, the sincerity, the heart that had always been there, even if he hadn't fully recognized it himself. "I've spent so long trying to prove myself in ways that don't really matter," Aldrich admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But now I realize that the only thing that truly matters is what's inside. And you, Beatrix, you've made me see that." Beatrix squeezed his hand gently, her eyes filled with warmth and affection. "I never needed you to be perfect, Aldrich. I just wanted you to be you, the real you. The man who cares for others, the man who can laugh, the man who sees the world for what it is, not just through the lens of wealth. Aldrich felt a lump form in his throat. It was as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. All of his life, he had sought approval and validation through his wealth, through the lavish gifts and extravagant gestures. But Beatrix had shown him that love wasn't won through grand displays. It was earned through vulnerability, through genuine connection, through being open to each other's truths. He leaned closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "So, does this mean you'll marry me?" Beatrix's smile deepened, and her eyes sparkled with affection. "Yes, Aldrich. I'll marry you. But not because of the wealth, or the challenge, or the bet. I'll marry you because you've finally learned what love is, and because you've shown me that you're ready to love me for who I am, too." Aldrich's heart soared, and in that moment, he knew that this wasn't just about winning a bet, it was about finding something he never knew he was looking for. In Beatrix, he had found not only a woman who could challenge him, but someone who had awakened in him a love he had never thought possible. And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting a golden glow over them, Aldrich felt more fulfilled than he ever had before. This was the love he had been searching for all along. And it was more beautiful than any fortune could ever be. The wedding day arrived with a gentle breeze, the sun shining softly over the village as Aldrich and Beatrix stood before their loved ones. The ceremony was simple, yet filled with warmth and joy. There were no grand chandeliers, no lavish ballrooms, just a modest church adorned with wildflowers from the surrounding fields and the faces of family, friends, and villagers who had witnessed their journey. Aldrich had never felt more at peace, more alive, than in that moment. His heart, once consumed by the desire to prove himself and to win a bet, was now full with a deeper, truer understanding of what love meant. Beatrix stood beside him, radiant and serene, her smile lighting up the room. She wasn't just the woman he had once set out to conquer, she was his partner, his equal, the woman who had shown him how to love with sincerity, vulnerability, and a spirit of selflessness. As the vows were exchanged, Aldrich looked into Beatrix's eyes, and the world seemed to fade away. It wasn't the wealth or the grand gestures that had brought them to this moment, it was the shared connection of hearts, the genuine affection they had built, brick by brick, over the months. When the ceremony concluded and the couple walked hand in hand down the aisle, Aldrich felt the weight of his past life lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be truly rich. It wasn't the gold, the opulent mansions, or the luxury he had once sought, it was the love they had found together. The years that followed were filled with adventures, growth, and a newfound sense of purpose. Aldrich and Beatrix traveled to distant lands, not to showcase their wealth, but to explore the world together, to learn from different cultures, and to spread kindness wherever they went. They returned to the village often, helping to fund new schools, providing medical care, and organizing charitable events. Aldrich discovered a joy in giving that he had never experienced before, but it wasn't just his money he gave.